$1.87. That's all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Penny saved 1 and 2 at a time by buying things from the grocery store, the vegetable man, and the butcher until your face feels hot from people thinking you're being too careful with money. Della counted it 3 times. $1.87. And tomorrow would be Christmas. There was nothing to do but sit down on the old, worn-out couch and cry. So, that's what Della did. This makes you think that life is a mix of crying, sniffing, and smiling, but mostly crying. While the lady of the home is going from feeling really sad to feeling a bit better, let's look at the home. It's a furnished apartment that costs $8 per week. It's not exactly falling apart, but it definitely looks like it needs some help. In the hallway downstairs, there's a mailbox where no letters go, and a doorbell that no one can make ring. Also, there's a sign with the name Mr. James Dillingham Young on it. The Dillingham name was probably used in better times when Mr. James Dillingham Young was making $30 per week. Now, with only $20 per week, they were thinking of changing it to just D. But when Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and went to his apartment, everyone called him Jim, and Mrs. James Dillingham Young, who you already know as Della, would hug him a lot. And that's nice. Della stopped crying and used a soft cloth with powder on her cheeks. She stood by the window and stared blankly at a gray cat walking along a gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow was Christmas Day, and she only had $1.87 to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months, but $20 a week doesn't last long. The costs were more than she thought they would be. They always are. Now, she had only $1.87 to get a gift for Jim. Her Jim. She had happily spent many hours planning to get something nice for him. Something special and valuable, something that was almost good enough for Jim. There was a big mirror between the windows in the room. Maybe you've seen a big mirror in an $8 apartment. A really skinny and quick person can get a pretty good idea of how they look by looking at themselves in a bunch of long, skinny strips in the mirror. Della, being thin, had learned how to do this. Suddenly, she turned away from the window and stood in front of the mirror. Her eyes were shining brightly, but her face lost its color in 20 seconds. Quickly, she let down her hair, and it flowed down to her knees. Now, the James Dillingham Youngs were really proud of 2 things. One was Jim's gold watch that belonged to his father and grandfather. The other was Della's hair. If the Queen of Sheba lived in the apartment across from theirs, Della would have let her hair hang out the window someday just to show off and make the Queen's jewels and gifts seem less special. If King Solomon were the building caretaker, with all his treasures in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he walked by, just to see King Solomon jealous. So now, Della's beautiful hair fell around her, shining like a waterfall of brown water. It reached below her knee and almost looked like a piece of clothing. Then she quickly tied it up again. She hesitated for a minute and stood still while a tear or two fell on the old, worn-out red carpet. She put on her old brown jacket and her old brown hat. With a spin of her skirt and the bright sparkle still in her eyes, she went out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, there was a sign that said, Madame Sofronie. Hair goods of all kinds. Della ran up one flight of stairs, trying to catch her breath. Madame, a big, very white, and cold-looking woman, didn't really seem like a Sofronie. Would you like to buy my hair? Della asked. I buy hair, said Madame. Take off your hat, and let me see what it looks like. Down fell the brown waterfall of hair. $20, said Madame, lifting the hair with an experienced hand. Give it to me quickly, said Della. Oh, the next 2 hours went by quickly and happily. Forget the fancy words. She was searching through the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. It was definitely made for Jim and no one else. There was nothing else like it in any of the stores, and she had looked through all of them. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and pure in design, showing its value by its substance and not by unnecessary decorations, as all good things should. It was truly fitting for the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew it had to be Jim's. It was just like him. Quiet and valuable, those words described both. They took $21 from her for it, and she hurried home with the 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim would be rightly concerned about the time in any situation. As great as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it secretly because of the old leather strap he used instead of a chain. When Della got home, her excitement turned a bit more sensible. She took out her curling irons, lit the gas, and started fixing the damage caused by being generous out of love. Fixing that, my dear friends, is always a huge job, a really big job. In about 40 minutes, her head was covered with small, closely packed curls that made her look a lot like a schoolboy playing hooky. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time, carefully and thoughtfully. If Jim doesn't get mad at me, she thought to herself, before he looks at me again, he'll say I look like a girl from Coney Island. But what else could I do? Whoa! What else could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was ready, and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della held the fob chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table near the door he always came in through. Then she heard his steps on the stairs far down on the first floor, and she turned white for just a moment. She always said a little silent prayer about simple, everyday things, and now she whispered, "Please God, make him think I'm still pretty." The door opened, and Jim came in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. Poor guy, he was only 22 and had a family to take care of. He needed a new coat, and he didn't have gloves. Jim stood by the door, as still as a hunting dog when it smells quail. His eyes were fixed on Della, and there was an expression in them that she couldn't understand, and it scared her. It wasn't anger, surprise, disapproval, horror, or any of the things she expected. He just stared at her with that strange look on his face. Della slid off the table and went to him. "Jim, sweetheart," she said, "don't look at me like that. I cut off and sold my hair because I couldn't have gotten through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow back, you won't mind, will you? I had to do it. My hair grows really fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you. You cut your hair? Jim asked, like he hadn't quite figured that out yet, even after thinking really hard. I cut it off and sold it, Della replied. Don't you still like me? I'm still me without my hair, right? Jim looked around the room as if he couldn't believe it. Your hair is really gone, he said, almost sounding silly. You don't have to look for it, said Della. I told you, it's sold and gone. It's Christmas Eve, dear. Be nice to me because I did it for you. Maybe they counted the hairs on my head, she added sweetly, but no one could count how much I love you. Should I start cooking the chops, Jim? Jim snapped out of his daze and hugged Della. Let's look at some random thing in the other direction for 10 seconds. $8 a week or $1 million a year, what's the difference? A smart person or a funny person might give you the wrong answer. The wise men brought valuable gifts, but this wasn't one of them. We'll figure out what this mysterious statement means later. Jim pulled a package from his coat pocket and put it on the table. Don't get me wrong, Del, he said, I don't think anything haircut, shave, or shampoo could make me like you any less. But if you open that package, you might understand why you surprised me a bit at first. Della's quick fingers untied the string and tore off the paper. First, a happy scream, and then, unfortunately, a sudden change to crying and wailing, needing Jim's immediate comfort. There lay the combs, the set of combs, side and back, that Della had admired for a long time in a store window. Beautiful combs, made of pure tortoise shell with jeweled edges, the perfect color to wear with her beautiful, now missing hair. She knew they were expensive, and her heart had longed for them, even though she never thought she'd actually have them. And now, they were hers, but the hair that should have adorned them was gone. But she held the combs close to her, and finally, she could look up with watery eyes and a smile, saying, My hair grows so fast, Jim. Then, like a little startled cat, Della jumped up and exclaimed, Oh, oh. Jim hadn't seen his wonderful gift yet. She eagerly presented it to him on her open hand. The plain precious metal seemed to shine with a reflection of her lively and enthusiastic spirit. Isn't it great, Jim? I looked all over town to find it. Now you'll have to check the time 100 times a day. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it. Instead of doing that, Jim sat down on the couch, put his hands behind his head, and smiled. Del, he said, let's put our Christmas presents away and keep them for a while. They're too nice to use right now. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. And now, how about you cook those chops? And here I've clumsily told you the simple story of two silly people in an apartment who unwisely gave up their most valuable possessions for each other. But, in a final note to the wise people of today, Let it be said that among all those who give gifts, these two were the wisest.